So I saw a video recently by Sandman about the Japanese herbivore guy, the grass eater, and I think it was a good video. I think that it was pretty accurate. It was still a little bit too academic. I think that maybe he didn't really have any experience seeing it face to face. Maybe he read about it in articles, or maybe he just saw it online or something like that. But I don't think that he really knew what they were like face to face. And I have a lot of experience teaching overseas, so I've seen many examples. In fact, I was just thinking back to 2011 because I was there when the earthquake happened. And in fact, at the very time that it happened, I was teaching an English lesson to just the perfect example of the Japanese herbivore guy. In fact, I remember clearly he looked at me. I didn't even feel it at first, and then he looked at his book. He looked up at me and said, "There's an earthquake." And I was like, "Really?" And then a second later, just bam, shaking, shaking, shaking. So that guy, a young kid named Junki, he was the perfect example of a Japanese herbivore guy. So if you're not familiar, I'll give a little background. The term in Japanese is soushoku-kei. Soushoku, meaning like the literal term for herbivore, plant eater, and then kei, it means something like group or type. If you're familiar with things like visual kei, something kei, it's used often. So, what does that mean? What does this, herbivore guy mean? In a practical sense. So, I was first introduced to this term just by a student that I was teaching, and he was trying to explain to me what it meant, and I think I kind of got it. But then I went to my wife and I said, what does that mean? Because it sounds like it means gay. And she said, well, it doesn't mean gay. They're not gay. They're guys that do want a girlfriend, but they're not really willing to pursue a girl. They're not really willing to kind of hunt one down and be aggressive in the typical male sense. So calling them herbivores is I think it's a very accurate way to describe it, because they don't want to draw blood. They don't want to they don't want to hurt anybody. And I think that I've been told from way back when I first started learning Japanese, one of my Japanese friends told me that Japan is a very feminized country. It's very female. It's very gentle. So things like aggression are really big no-nos. And most guys they don't want to go outside the lines as far as that's concerned. So I've heard a number of different numbers and statistics. And by the way, I don't feel like those are very accurate, because it's very hard to judge who is an herbivore guy. But from what I've heard, there's actually very high numbers. Many people between 20 and 30, maybe between 60 and 70%, call themselves herbivore guys. They would describe themselves in that way. So it's becoming a very big issue in Japan. A large population of young males not getting married means not producing babies, not producing the next generation. And with the population of Japan already getting very old, they're going to need those young backs kind of in the trenches. So it's really become like a national problem for Japan, with no real easy way to fix it. There's just kind of like a very large number of kind of alienated guys who just aren't motivated. They're not really motivated to find a wife. They're not really motivated to find a girlfriend. they're not gay. They do like girls. They're just not motivated in that traditional sense of like a man hunting down a woman. And not to kind of harp all over the youth of Japan, but in recent years there are other growing phenomenon, something similar to this. Things like NEETs. I think it stands for like not in education. What was that? Not in education, no experience, or no training. Maybe I'm wrong, but something like that. Basically, people who are not trying to do anything with their lives, or parasite singles, which are usually girls who, they're not going to get married, they're not going to find a job, they're just living with, their parents. So that kind of phenomenon has been, on the increase in Japan in recent years. So I'm not going to go into kind of a complex and technical assessment of all Japanese culture and explain why this happens, on a very kind of technical level. I'm just going to cover my experiences and observations made and just my own conjectures of why this happens. So let me first start off by throwing out the fact that in the 5 years that I lived in Japan, in the 5 years I lived there were 6 prime ministers. So, draw from that what you will. For me, it really stood out that people really didn't want that. In a general sense, even politicians, even professional politicians, really didn't want to be in the spotlight. They really didn't want the responsibility. And that's just a microcosm of what happens, on a very general level in Japan. It's best not to be kind of in the spotlight. It's best to be, behind the scenes, not having not having to take the fall, basically. I recently kind of confused a friend of mine when I told him that I feel like Japanese people give up very easily. He was confused by that, and the reason he was confused was he told me that he thinks that, he's only seen the opposite of examples of Japanese who will work and try something forever. Like there was the example of a guy who was, I think there was a couple of guys. One of them was in Guam, and he was, just maybe in recent years, maybe the last 10, 20 years, he came out of Guam, and he was there since World War II, just staying on his own and just fighting the fight on his own. So when I was explaining to my friend that I think the Japanese quit very easily, I could see why he got confused, because it's not quite the same way. In fact, I don't think that most Japanese consciously think that they're giving up so easily. It's a little bit hard to explain in simple terms. So, to kind of explain what I mean, I want to share a term for those who really don't know any Japanese. There is a very, very common phrase in Japanese parlance, and it's called Shikataganai, or shoganai. This phrase literally means there is no way. So what it means when you're saying it in a conversation, or when you would say it when, you just feel like we can't do anything about it. Like, say for example, you want to go to a party, or you want to go outside to a picnic or something like that, but on the day that you planned, it's raining cats and dogs, so you can't have the party. Shoganai. In that case, there's nothing you could do. So the thing is, this phrase is very, very common, and you're going to hear this all the time, every day in Japanese conversation. I would say more than we use the phrase, "it can't be helped" in English. I think it's really important because I think it really speaks to the way Japanese people think. Um, it really is telling how much they use that phrase and in what situations they use that phrase. To kind of illustrate my point, think about otaku culture. Think about, if you've ever seen like, any kind of, movie that's in otaku or anime culture. Think about like a kaiju movie. If you've ever watched something like Godzilla, like this kind of thing happens all the time. What I mean is, in a realistic sense, it doesn't really make any sense, but in the movie it makes sense. So Godzilla, he'll be shot by the military. They're shooting tanks at him. They're shooting like ballista. They're shooting missiles at him, and it has no effect. He's completely invincible. You could shoot missiles into his eyeball, and it won't hurt him. Not because it's realistic, not because that would actually happen in real life. God damn it. But because, when you're watching a movie, it's the product of someone's imagination, and that's just the way many Japanese people tend to think. And it's not just in movies. Of course, it is a lot, but what I'm saying is that kind of way of thinking. It's kind of like assessing things on a very numeric scale, right? This person is strong, this person is weak, this weak person can never beat the strong person. It's that kind of thinking, and it just pervades into a lot of the way they think and a lot of the way they tell stories. One of my favorite examples was in Dragon Ball Z, and if you're a fan of Dragon Ball Z, numbers, power rating is something it happens. It's just a basic part of the storytelling world. So when a person has a certain power level and it's stronger than the next person, the person below them cannot win. Just cannot win. Now the thing is, that's just not really how life works. Like if you're a fan of things like boxing or sports or anything. I'm a big fan of a lot of sports. I'm a big fan of recently I've really gotten into the fighting game scene. So the thing about even very, very high level players is there is an element of rock paper scissors. There is an element of I punch here and you punch here, and maybe I win this time, maybe I lose next time. Even at the highest level, there is an element of that. But the funny thing is, in anime and in manga culture, there is nothing like that. If a person is stronger and the person is weaker, the weaker person cannot do anything, can never beat that person. So like I said, Godzilla, you could shoot missiles into his eyeball, you're never going to beat him. It doesn't matter how many, and it doesn't matter that that's unrealistic, that it couldn't happen. That's how it works. And one of my classic scenes where I think about that is there's a part in Dragon Ball Z where Vegeta, he becomes a Super Saiyan, and he's fighting the robot 18. And he can't do anything to beat her. He can't do anything. So as hard as he tries, no matter what, he will never beat 18. But then a little time passes, he gets a little training, he levels up, and then suddenly the shoe's completely on the other foot. There's no way that she can beat him. Suddenly he's become the stronger one, she's become the weaker one, and there's no way she can beat him. And he doesn't even have to try hard, he's just stronger. So that's just an example. That's just a clue into the way that Japanese people think. Numbers. Anything that has to do with numbers or like numeric value, things that you can kind of measure in a certain way, that really is the way they think. So, how does this relate to herbivore guys? Well, I'm explaining this because it's necessary to understand, how Japanese people think to understand how things happen in Japanese society. And the flat truth of it is that the Japanese people, on the whole, are very sharp and very intelligent. But the flip side of that coin is that sharpness can be very double-edged. And if you only judge things on a numeric value, it's kind of silly in a way. It's kind of like it makes logical sense to a degree, but if you take that logic farther and farther, the farther and farther you take that logic, the more it kind of collapses in on itself. And I'll try to explain what I mean by that. So the problem happens, and this kind of goes back to what I said before about convenience in my other video, is that Japanese people, they tend to want to prepare the perfect answer for any problem before that problem comes to them. They want to have, the perfect response to any trouble that would come to them. I call it keeping the world pushed away at arm's length. Like, if the world or any trouble comes to them, they have an automatic response to push it back, and then they can kind of observe it the way they want to. It's a way to kind of preserve your own little space. But the problem is, sometimes you have to rub up against the world, and sometimes it's not pretty. Japanese really don't like that. They love to prepare things in advance and to have the perfect answer. This is why, if you're familiar with it, you'll see many Japanese just freak out if they don't know, if they're meeting like foreign businessmen, or if they're meeting, outside their company's businessmen. They will freak out if they don't know exactly who is ranked in what position. And they'll freak out because it's very important to them where to sit, who to bow to, how low to bow, what you can say, what you can't say. That's all determined by your position, by almost what you'd call numeric values. And if they don't know, they freak out. So as a teacher, I've had many experiences, and it's kind of funny, actually, where I'm trying to explain to the person that numbers really don't matter, at least in this case. What I mean by that is I'm trying to explain to a person that it doesn't matter what level you are. We have different levels, and we give them different books for different levels. So a level 1 student will get a level 1 book, and we'll try and match as best as possible. But I'm trying to explain to them that it doesn't really matter. Just because you're level 1 doesn't mean you can only make simple sentences, If you want to speak more, if you want to speak better, it's really up to you. And I've had so many situations where it's kind of funny, because I'm trying to explain to them, no, your number doesn't matter. And their reaction is something like, oh, yes, it doesn't matter. Okay, but really, what's my number? And I'm like, no, it doesn't matter. Say whatever you want to. And they're kind of like sweating bullets. Yeah, doesn't matter. Yeah, it doesn't matter. Okay, but really, what's my number? So that's just kind of an insight into how they think. So the problem is, when people kind of keep life pushed away at that hand's length level, it's very, very easy for them to fall into that shoganai mode. It's very, very easy for them to fall into that mode where if something is too hard, or something is not perfectly to what they want, or they don't have the perfect answer, then they'll very, very easily say, oh, shoganai, can't deal with that problem. Life becomes very static. People kind of get drawn into their position. It becomes kind of like trench warfare in a certain way. Most aspects of society, as I said, they get very static, they get very streamlined, but the creativity falls away. So, for example, think about the situation where you go to a convenience store. That person has a list of greetings, questions, and goodbyes that they say all in a row, and they've done it so many times, they know exactly, hello, welcome to the store, would you like paper or plastic, thank you, have a nice day. They do that so much that it becomes rote, and it becomes very fast and very accurate, but at the same time, you don't really get a sense of who they are. You don't really get a sense of what they're thinking, because they're not thinking. Their mind, in that case, is, I often call it riding the rail. It's like their mind is on like railroad tracks, and it's really hard to get them off of that. So, that's kind of how society is on the whole in Japan. So, just think about the conundrum of getting people to judge, or think about the conundrum of judging the intelligence of a classroom of people by test scores. So let me ask, do you think that test scores, that the person who scores from the highest to lowest on any given test is an accurate representation of the intelligence from, top to bottom of a classroom? I would say that most people could agree to a couple of things. Number one, it's not useless. Testing could be a fairly relevant, way to judge who is smart and who is not smart in a class. But to say that that's all there is to it, I think that we can all agree that that's kind of foolish. Anybody knows that there's more to it than that. But the problem is, that's how Japanese society on the whole operates. There are people who believe in the test. They believe, quite literally in the scores on the test. Now, that kind of thinking is just, putting the cart before the horse in a major way. Being an English teacher in Japan, I've seen many of these tests in English because some of the students would bring it in. And the grammar is so complicated that even for a native speaker, it's like, I don't even know this. And the thing is, it doesn't matter. Like, they're testing you on these grammar points that are so specific that they're useless. Nobody cares. It's the kind of thing that, like, you'll test a person on this kind of information that they'll never practically use in real life. And I know that because, of course, I'm a native speaker of English. I know what we say, on a daily basis, and I know the things that we don't say. And if I see a question that's so theoretical, it's like, you're asking a person to study many of these books, read all these, grammar questions, just to get information that's thoroughly useless. That totally puts the cart before the horse. And the problem is, they're going to be judged by that. And whatever score they get, that's going to mean more than I feel like it really should. So a person will get a very high score on some test, and I'll talk to that guy, at the train station, and I'll say, hey, what's up? And he'll be like, hi. Like, if he doesn't try to ignore me flat out, or just the opposite, I'll have a person who has a terrible score on a test, absolutely atrocious. They're like, bottom 10%, but I meet them at the train station, and they're like, hi, Sean, good day, it's hot, like, they're trying their best. They don't have great technical skill, but this kind of gets back to something that I really believe in, which is, in life we have a lot of animals around us, and in a funny way, I really think they do represent us in a certain ways. Like, relevant to this discussion, I want to talk about cats and dogs. They're our most common pets, right? And in a funny way, I really think that they do represent something about us, something about humans in general. We all want to be cats, we all want that kind of, grace, beauty of movements, that kind of perfection. We want that, that kind of accuracy in movements, which I would, think is like a very technical, perfect. I would describe it in kind of a technical or perfect way. Whereas the dog, nobody really wants to be the dog because the dog is kind of stupid. But the dog is also loyal. It's also good-hearted, and it's also just kind of straightforward, honest, you know. And the thing is, in a fight between the cat and the dog, the big cat would win every time, and that's kind of what we'd like to be. But sometimes the dog does win the fight because it has fight in it, and I think that kind of way of thinking, sometimes it really is good to be a dog, to just be kind of stupid, but to throw yourself in there with all of your heart. Even though our goal, what we'd really like to be, is graceful and perfect like the cat. And I think that both of them have their good points and bad points, but I think that Japanese people are kind of stuck on being the cat. They don't want to be the dog at all, and I think that's kind of works to their detriment. So basically, you have a society of people who have a great propensity for judging things kind of at a distance, and a tendency for analyzing things in terms of numbers, and like technical data. And it becomes very hard to get them to open their eyes to the reality of life as it is. As I said, I had lots of funny experiences telling people that numbers don't matter, and just seeing them sweat bullets like they do matter, because of course they do. But you have to understand there's reality beyond those numbers. So it's really hard to change, it's really hard to get change in society where, you judge everyone by the best test score. You're going to get a selected group of winners. If you have any test, there is somebody who's going to score the highest score, and it's not necessarily an accurate representation of who is the smartest, but that person kind of wins. And then everybody else, the much larger percentage, they're going to be losers, and they're going to consider themselves losers because the jobs, they're only going to go to that top percent. And it's, honestly, it's very, I find it very capricious. It's actually very, very alienating to this large group of younger Japanese. A lot of people will feel like they're losers even when they're not. Even when they're actually very good, they tried very hard, they just didn't get the best score. Somebody got a few points higher than them. Doesn't necessarily mean that they're losers, but for all intents and purposes, they think of themselves that way. So for the few people who win, it's kind of in their best interest to convince the losers that they're losers, because that'll differentiate them from their competition. That'll make it easier for them. So they will do like that convenience store clerk. They will get very, very good and very, very efficient at doing a few things, and doing those few things perfectly. No matter what those few things are, if it's being a news reporter, being a doctor, being a teacher, they will focus on what it is that differentiates themselves from the losers, we'll call them, and they will make themselves kind of perfect at those few things. So it's very, very hard to compete with those people who kind of got a chance to improve their skills. Everybody else who's on the outside, they're going to judge themselves much more harshly than I think they really need to be judged. But that's just kind of how it's going to work out. So meanwhile, everybody involved wants to do things like that clerk in a way that's just as quick and painless as possible. So when people butt up their heads against any kind of resistance, like career, relationships, etc., they tend to take the attitude that if I'm not perfect right out of the box, or if I'm level 4 and that girl is level 5, then shoganai, forget it. I'm not even going to try. And I think that attitude is it's really killing Japan. It's really killing, the young generation. There's so many chances in between, when they graduate, high school, graduate university, to when they try and get a job, meeting young people they want to date. I think that they have so many chances where they feel like losers. And they feel like, well, I'm a loser, so I shouldn't try. I'm level 2 and everybody else is level 3, 4, or 5. But the point is, you have to be a dog. You have to throw yourself in there, even if you're not at that level, But a lot of them lose the motivation to do that. It's the kind of thing that I've made a couple of chess videos. If you're a chess player listening to this, you might sympathize. You might know what it's like to kind of judge a position with finality before that finality is warranted. As a chess player, you often look at a position and you feel like, oh, there's nothing I could do, But if you step back, go back to the board, you'll find moves that you didn't consider before, and then suddenly everything changes. And the problem is that's a chess game. In real life, people will take those kind of final assessments and they'll run with them, and they won't stop and think about that. They won't kind of come back to the board. They'll just look at themselves as a loser. And the thing is, I've met so many good Japanese guys and girls. They're very good, very, either good looking or intelligent or very, very nice. But, Japanese society as a whole doesn't really focus on what they're good at. They're not really allowed to explore what it is that they're good at. They're actually kind of told to suppress all that and to not say they're good at something because that's rude. And the problem is you have this young generation of people who, they're judged in a very capricious way. So they tend to only focus on what they can do perfectly. And if they can't do it perfectly, then they won't even try. And I think, just in my personal experience, I think that's kind of what's creating this whole, herbivore guy problem. They don't think they're worth anything because they've already been judged as worthless, in some aspect of society before any kind of true value could have been measured. And I think it's just kind of sad because it's unnecessary. I've met, like I said, both sides of the equation. I've met so many good guys and I've met so many good girls, and they can't get together. They have all the elements, like this guy, he's not a perfect guy, he's not the smartest guy, but he's got a good heart, he has blah 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 hobby, like train spotting or whatever. Same thing, there's a girl over here, she's not a supermodel, but she's very cute, she's very nice, she's looking for a guy. They both feel like losers in a certain way, because they've been judged like that throughout society, and they've not really been told, that they're good, and they've not really been told, what their value is. And whenever there's been a chance to compete, they kind of throw in the towel early. They would make a great match for each other, but in between A and B, they already feel like they can't, and so they already give up. So I don't really see an easy way for that to change. I think that there's a lot of factors that kind of go into it and have been going into it for a long time. I think that people who really do, land in certain positions, they tend to be very static. They want other people to feel like losers. They want to kind of protect that space that they've gotten for themselves. And it seems that everybody wants to carve out a very, very simple, perfect niche for themselves. So it means that they don't really want to stretch past what they can do. They just want to find one thing and do that one thing well. And while there is a very good side to it, nobody can argue that Japan is one of the cleanest, well-educated, low crime, just great countries. I think that this is it's a very big problem. I don't think it's going to be solved, very easily. I think it really takes some kind of like real courage on the part of people in general to just be able to say, we have to be dogs. We can't all be perfect cats. That's just, it's just not going to work. Something is going to have to give in between now and then. I think that, of course, they're capable of that kind of thing. I just don't think it's what they typically do. So, I think that I don't know. I think that it could be it could be potentially disastrous. With the decline in birth rates, the population getting older, and disaster is not something that anybody wants to go through. But I think that struggle does make people stronger, and I think that facing challenges does bring out the dog in people. It makes people work harder. So maybe that's just natural. Maybe that's just what naturally happens. I don't know. Anyway, if you have any other thoughts on that, I'd be happy to hear it. That's just what I kind of took out of my experiences with herbivore guys. Going back to the original guy, Junki, the reason I thought he was gay is because he was just very dainty. Young guy, maybe 22, 23, and whenever you asked him a question, he would kind of giggle behind his hands and put his hands together like this, and I like this. I like this. Like that kind of personality. So, there's a lot of guys like that. It seems kind of funny. I've had guys like him. I've had like a bunch of guys who just like love nothing more than taking pictures of cats or like sharing cats. It's just their thing. They're actually good guys. They're kind of goofy. They're kind of goofy guys, but they're very, very good. So I think that when they actually get their chance, when they get a fair chance to show who they are, I think that they do have good hearts underneath. It's just that they don't want to push themselves into a place where they have to give up something, and that's kind of the burden. That's kind of the rub in the situation. Anyway, thanks for listening. 見てくれてありがとうございます。